Hi, beautiful souls, and welcome to this edition of the Conscious Leader Live session. Today, we're going to be talking about visibly demonstrating our values. And I'm going to go ahead and switch. Welcome, everyone. So, today, we're going to be talking about visibly demonstrating our values. And this is part of the third book in our series, Consciously Congruent. And the topic for this session is going to be on congruence specifically. And the thing that I want to share here is that the most important thing when we talk about leadership congruence is actually about building trust in your teams and in yourself by demonstrating your integrity across time and context. And so key component of congruence here is the integrity that you demonstrate visibly across time and context. And we're going to talk about this in much more detail as we navigate through the discussion today. But I want to first start by welcoming you all. Thank you for coming. I appreciate everyone for joining us. And in our session today, we're actually going to cover two different newsletters. And that is going to be the May 6th and the June 2nd newsletters of the Conscious Leader. So specifically, we're going to be exploring how do you actually trace your values back to your behaviors, and then how do you detect incongruence or misalignment in your leadership practice. And so just to give you a very quick overview of what we're going to talk about today, we're going to do a really quick opening. So as always, we will start with a grounding exercise. I'll ask you to bring an intention forward. Then we will talk about how to actually trace those values to your behaviors. And we'll talk about how to read signals to detect your own misalignment or your own incongruence. And we'll talk about that in terms of your body, the behaviors that you have, and the feedback that you get from others. And then we'll do a live practice to get kind of a little bit more practical to help you to understand how to actually apply the information that we're talking about. And we'll go from there into a very short closing. And so welcome again. So excited to have you all. And I want to remind you all, if this is your first session, this is not meant to be a traditional webinar or a lecture. It is really meant to give you time and space to honestly look at how you're leading and where you can improve. And so before we dive in, I want us to set a really simple intention. And excuse me, the intention that I want to set for us today is for you to be as honest as you can with yourself about the things that we're going to talk about today. And so this is the space for you, and there's no need in this space or in this context to try to rush to any kind of right answer. The goal here is for you to be able to look at your leadership with the kind of clarity that is going to help you make real change possible in your life. And so to start us off, I would love to do a very brief grounding exercise. And all I want you to do is, if you're seated in a chair, I want you to put your feet on the ground. I want you to sit up straight. I want you to take 1 to 3 deep breaths, slow deep breaths in and out through your nose. And all this is going to do is to calm your nervous system just a little bit, to tap into your intention. And as you're doing your deep breaths, I just want you to try to bring a specific leadership situation to mind. I don't want this to be something that's hypothetical. I want it to be something practical and actively happening in your life. And if you can't think of a specific leadership context, then I want you to at least think of an interpersonal dynamic that you have that's related to your values and misalignment that you have in that regard. And so this can look like anything from a feedback dynamic that you've been navigating, a recurring pattern that you've been noticing and wanting to change, or if there's any area that you suspect maybe your impact is not matching your intention. And what I want you to do is, once you have that specific situation, I want you to hold that. And I want you to come back to your intention that this space is meant for you to learn and to grow. And we're going to come back to this situation throughout our session today. So for those of you who have been reading the Conscious Leader newsletter, I want to say welcome back. And if you are joining for the first time, I want to say don't worry. Everything that you're going to need, you're going to get right here in this session. And over the last few issues of the newsletter, we've kind of been building the practice of congruence and how congruence supports you on your leadership journey with the people that you interact with every day. And I'm going to just come back to really quickly. Congruence here is that trust that you build through your integrity being visibly demonstrated in your values and your behaviors across time and across context. Okay, so in issue 14, we talked about what alignment actually looks like in practice and how to trace your values to your specific behaviors. And then in the 15th issue, we went a little bit further and we talked about how to actually listen for incongruence or misalignment by exploring how to use feedback from other people, signals that you're getting from your body, and the actual specific behavioral patterns that you have in your daily life to help you detect misalignment before it compounds and compromises trust. And so today we're going to bring both of those areas together to try and give you a simple, single approach to help you visibly demonstrate those values in your daily life. And what I want us to do today is to be able to trace your values so that you have a baseline understanding of how congruent you actually are. And then I want you to be able to actually detect when you are not aligned with your values. And the reason I want you to be able to do both of these things is because it's going to give you a healthy mirror to see where you are and how you can actually improve in your leadership. And together, these skills are going to help you kind of create a foundation for what we call congruence. And again, this is the kind of leadership integrity that people can actually see, they can feel, and they can experience through your behaviors and through your actions and through your decisions. So the first part of this is tracing your values so that you know what your baseline is. And so I want us to start with the question that most people do not ask often enough. And that is what you value actually visible in your daily behaviors? And I want to be really clear here that this is not about the intention that you have. We've moved on from intentionality. This is now about the actual impact of your behaviors and your actions. And so it's not about your intentions, it's not about your messaging, and it's not who you are on your best day. It is who are you in the repeated and observable patterns that you have in how you show up across time and across different contexts. And this is where your integrity lives. And I want to pause here for a moment to talk about what do I mean by across time and across context. And what I mean by this, when you are trying to build or establish trust, you can't just tell people that they have to trust you. You have to tell people that you want them to trust you, and then you have to give them specific reasons to trust you. And you do that through your behaviors and your actions and your interactions with the people that you're asking to trust you. And so if I am asking someone to trust me to help them navigate a specific change or a specific initiative that we're working towards, then I want to actually tell them, I want you to trust me through this, and here's what I'm going to do to try and build that trust. Then I have to visibly demonstrate that every single day. And when I say every single day, I'm not just talking about for a week or 2 weeks, but the entire duration of your leadership. And so change initiatives, especially in large organizations, can take years to come to fruition. And when I say across time, I want to also acknowledge that you're going to make mistakes and you're going to get it wrong. And if your change initiative is a 3-year initiative and you mess up somewhere along the way, it's not an end all to you losing trust unless you continue to mess up across time, right? But if you mess up and you course correct and you get it right again and again and again across that time, then across that time, you're going to be more congruent than you are incongruent. And that congruence in or alignment between your values and your behaviors is what's going to give people the trust that you're asking from them. And when I say across context, what I mean by this is the different people that you interact with. And so do your values and your behaviors align when you're talking to the executive team? And do they align when you're talking to the middle managers? And do they align when they're talking to your frontline workers? And so who you are in each one of those contexts is relevant. And you have to consistently demonstrate in each one of those contexts who you are and how you are and what you value. And I don't just mean the different people context, but I also mean the different environments and the different circumstances and the different triggers that are going to come up for you. All of those things are contextual information that you have to manage your integrity across. And so when I say across time and context, I'm talking about all of this, right? And so the question again is what you value actually visible in your behavior every single day? And this is different from asking yourself, do I feel aligned? And it specifically is asking, what is the evidence that I have right now that demonstrates my value in action every single day? And what would someone who works closely with me actually observe in my behavior? And with that, I want to talk about what alignment actually looks like and how you can trace your own values. And so we're going to do this by talking about the first 2 dimensions of congruence in the book and in the workbook. And the first is clarifying your internal compass, and the second is identifying your observable behaviors. And so if you've ever taken any leadership course, you have been told that you need to know and you need to understand what your values are. This is the foundation of who you are and how you lead. And so you have to know what you stand for, why you stand for it. And you have to be very clear in that in order to actually consistently check your behaviors against that. And so in order to actually see, are you aligned or are you congruent in your actions and behaviors, you have to first know what those are. You have to be able to say, I value equity, I value kindness, I value service. Like, those are mine, right? You have to be able to say, this is what I value. Then you have to be able to say, I demonstrate that every day through this and through this and through this. And so you have to know, what are your actual values? And so if you don't know what your values are, pause here, define a set of values for yourself and for your leadership, because you can't move forward without knowing what those values are. And then second, once you know what your values are, then you have to be able to identify your specific behaviors that demonstrate those values every day. And this is when we talk about tracing our values through our behaviors. This is where we take a look at the specific value that we have, and we look at it through the lens or through the context of the behaviors that we're implementing every day, and how do those behaviors either support or not support the value that we're trying to demonstrate in our daily life. And so let's do an example. So to help you to understand a little bit about what we mean by this, I want to give you a handful of examples of specific leadership things that you might be focusing on. And so if you're focusing on psychological safety, you want to look at things like when someone actually challenges you, either in a meeting or in an interpersonal dynamic, what do you do? What is your what do your thoughts think? What do you say out loud? What does your face do? What does your body language do? And you want to think about, does your face tighten or soften? Do you invite the challenge? Do you redirect away from it? Like, how do you actually manage that direct confrontation of your authority to create safety? And so what are the specific behaviors that you do in that moment? And if you value equity, you want to think about things like whose voice are you consistently giving space to in your conversations? Who gets interrupted? Who gets the benefit of the doubt? All of those kinds of things. And who has access? Who doesn't have access? All of that. And if you value accountability, you want to look at what actually happens when you are not aligned or when you miss a commitment that you said that you would do. And you want to look at, are you actually able to acknowledge it out loud? Can you name it? And can you consciously adjust? Or does that moment just quietly pass and do you lose the opportunity to build more trust by fixing that mistake? And so when we are talking about aligning our values with our actual behaviors, we're talking about specifically defining the value that we have and then looking at all of our behaviors across the time or the context and saying, how do I visibly demonstrate this so other people can see this value in action from me? And yeah, I want to come back to like the conversation that this is, again, it's not about intentionality. So it does not matter if you mean well or not in this circumstance. What matters in this conversation now is about the actual impact that you have on others. Because we don't get to define our congruence in the team setting. We can define it for ourselves about whether or not we're holding ourselves accountable. If we said we were going to work out every day, did we actually work out every day? But in the team and in the organizational context, we don't get to define our congruence or our alignment with our values. Other people are constantly watching us and constantly deciding, are we in alignment? Are we in alignment? Are we in alignment? And so it's about what is actually visible in your behavior on a regular basis that other people see and experience. And so I want to talk about where most people's misalignment actually occurs. And this is in the micro moments that we have throughout our day. And I think most leaders think, oh, I have to think about it and I have to worry about it and I have to manage and navigate these really big moments where these complex topics come up. And I have to make sure that I'm doing it right in those moments. And I do not want to discredit those moments. Those are really, really powerful moments. But the vast majority of the time, people are going to decide whether or not they can trust us in the everyday moments. Okay, do we listen to them when they talk to us? Do we provide feedback and context to the things that we're processing and navigating? Do we, share responsibility, like all of the things that everyone is seeking as they're interacting with us in their daily lives? And so, let's talk about some micro moments. And so micro moments can really be anything, but when you think about what you do every single day, you want to think about things like the way that you present yourself and the tone that you're using, the body language that shifts or doesn't shift in a particular way when someone brings you a problem that maybe you don't have the physical capacity for, the emotional capacity for, or even the skill set to navigate. And so how do you actually manage your behaviors and your actions in these moments? Do you actively listen to what someone is saying to you? Do you listen to understand, or are you distracted when people are bringing you concerns? Or are you checking your phone? Are you trying to coordinate with other people? Are you on your computer, looking at the clock? Whatever it is, how fully and how dedicated are you in the moments that matter? And so some of the micro behaviors that we have are really, really subtle, and these are the moments where our culture is actually going to shift around us as leaders. And so the culture that we create is going to be created by these everyday micro moments. And whether or not our behavioral alignment to our stated values is demonstrated. And so as you move forward, I want you to not think about just the major decisions, like the strategic decisions that you have to make or the major milestones. I want you to think about the micro moments of your daily life and the ways that you interact with your teams every day. And I want you to use that to try and trace your values. And so with that, let's jump into a really, really quick practice to do it together. And what I want you to do is I want you to pick your highest level value. So the one that you consider to be the most central to your leadership identity. And then what I want you to do is I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, and I want you to reflect on, and I want you to actually annotate the answers to these questions. So the first question is, what is the value, first and foremost, that is most central to your leadership? And the first question is, what are the specific behaviors that demonstrate this value in your daily leadership? And I want you to concretely and specifically name the behaviors that support that. And the next thing that I want you to do is I want you to look honestly at the last 2 weeks. And I want you to ask yourself, where do you see clear evidence that you visibly demonstrated this value in practice over the last 2 weeks? Now, this can include major milestones and major moments, but again, think about the micro moments. And the next thing I want you to do is I want you to think about the gap. Where are you not in alignment with that value? And so specifically, what kind of contextual factors prevented you from visibly demonstrating your value? And so was it pressure from your higher level leadership team? Was it urgency to get something done? Was it a habitual pattern that you didn't even consciously think about, but you just reacted? Was it an emotional response that didn't allow you to respond the way that you wanted to respond, and it pulled you away from your value? I want you to think about what were the contextual factors that led to any misalignment you may have had over the last couple of weeks. And again, this is the contextual factors here. And it's important to know the contextual factors that lead to your misalignment so that in the future, you can better navigate any of those contextual factors as they come up to be more in alignment. And the last thing that I want you to reflect on here is, if someone who works with you, who works closely with you, we'll say, was asked to describe your leadership over the past week, how close would their description be to the value that you've named as central to your leadership? And whatever is coming up for you in this reflection, I want you to just hold on to it right now, because the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to ask you to look at and take action on that. So as you're navigating each one of these questions, this is the insight that you're gathering, but the next part of this is to take that insight and to turn it into conscious action. And so what I want you to do now is, actually what I want us to do now is I want to talk about kind of 3 channels that will help you to understand when you're being congruent and when you're not being congruent. And so now that you have your baseline, so specifically the value that you can trace and name, where you're in alignment, where you're not in alignment, the question now becomes, how do you in real time notice when you're drifting before that misalignment actually compounds and compromises trust. Now, as part of this, we're going to talk about stages 4 and 5 of congruence, specifically facilitating feedback and auditing your alignment. I also want to note here that we've intentionally skipped over the third dimension, which is to pause and reflect. And we've talked about pausing and reflecting previously, and we will talk about it much more as we get into the next book. And so we're gonna move over this right now, but it is in the workbook and it is in the actual book if you want to spend time on that area. But let's talk about the 3 distinct channels for how you can detect or determine incongruence in yourself. And one of the most kind of underused channel that we have as leaders is actually our body. And our body is the thing that is available to us in every single moment, right? We own our body and our behavioral patterns that exist because of our mindset and our physiological reactions that are happening in our body. And our body actually knows whether or not we're aligned or not well before our mind can even consciously interpret it. And so I want you to be able to understand your physiology and how it plays a role in this process. And so what we mean by understanding your body as a channel to whether or not you're being congruent or not is to recognize when you have tension in your shoulders before a difficult conversation. That is literally your body signaling to you that something is there that needs to come up. And so whether it's you're worried about how the conversation is going to go, you're worried about the skill sets that you have to navigate that conversation, or like whatever it is, your body is clearly telling you something is coming up, right? And so if you have, contractions in your chest, if you have an urge to kind of speed up, to push through, or anything along those lines, these are all indications that your body is telling you to pause and to reflect. And I want to be really clear that the best leaders are able to recognize these physiological responses as data to help them navigate their leadership. And so the leader who is able to read those signals accurately can then lead from a very different place of awareness of what their body is trying to tell them and what their mind may be telling them to kind of suppress or override or whatever it is. And so if as a leader you can master the skill set of seeing these physiological responses as data, it is going to help you navigate your circumstances better because you can have more clarity about what the actual problem is. Is it an emotional response? Is it a fear response? Like, what is actually happening? Why does it matter? And what do you need to do with that before you get in the circumstance that might cause you to be incongruent or misaligned with your values? And so what I want you to do is I want you to reflect on when you're in a specific leadership moment where you know that you're uncomfortable, but you cannot necessarily articulate it. I want you to think about how does your body actually respond and what could that be telling you about what you need to understand. And so specifically, what does your body do? Where do you feel it in your body? Is your heart racing? Is your neck and your cheeks flushed because the blood is rushing to a particular place in your body? Are you carrying a lot of stress and a lot of tension? Are you clenching your jaws? Is your face like showing some clear discomfort or whatever? And I want you to think about what that could actually be telling you about your leadership. So for me, as an example, I'm annoyed is written all over my face and it is visible on my face. And so if I can recognize that I'm having a face like this as I'm sitting with someone, then I can tell myself, okay, I need to adjust my face. I need to think, why is my body doing that? It's doing that because I'm feeling annoyed. I'm feeling that this person doesn't have X, Y, and Z. And I need to let that go for now. And I need to meet this person where they're at. And so like if you're able to recognize some of these triggers, or let's say your heart's pounding. So what is that trying to tell you? Is it trying to tell you that you're nervous because you feel like you might not have the skill sets? Are you nervous because you feel like you don't know how to navigate the actual contextual components of that, which is the case many, many times when we talk about diversity and inclusion concerns, managing and navigating change, where as a leader you have to actually withhold some information that can sometimes be really, really hard to do when you want to share and you want to be transparent and you want to do things. And so, like, what is that increased heart rate trying to tell you, or whatever the signal is that's happening in your body? What is it trying to tell you? And if you can figure out what that signal is trying to tell you, it will help you to better navigate the circumstance as a whole. The second area that I want to talk about is your actual recurring patterns. And your misalignment will usually show up in many of the same moments and under the same kind of conditions. And so this is why we talk about across time and context. What are the contextual factors that play a role in this? And our behavioral patterns are often linked to the contextual dynamics. And so when we're talking about interpersonal dynamics, if I'm an anxious person and I'm in a relationship with someone who is avoidant, then like that dynamic is going to constantly come out when I'm in that context. When someone pulls away, I'm going to get anxious. Someone pulls away, I'm going to get anxious. And so that behavioral pattern of pulling away, getting anxious, pulling away, getting anxious is context specific, because I may not be like that in any of my other relationships, but because I have an intimate relationship with this person and because they specifically are avoidant, I then get anxious, right? And so whatever that context is in your leadership style, what are the specific behavioral patterns that you have, and what are the specific conditions that bring that to light? And we cover this in the auditing your alignment area of the congruence framework. But if you want or need help with this, then in book 3, there's a simple tool. We call it the Congruence scorecard. And you can basically look at 3 to 5 core values, rate them across different situations in a given week. And there's also a brief reflection in there that will help you to understand where you're aligned and where you're pulled off course. And so, again, behavioral patterns and the specific conditions that contribute to those patterns. And so if you know what those conditions are, then as you're preparing to go into those conditions, you can recognize your behavioral pattern and then try to, as much as possible, navigate them in real time. Okay, one last thing that I want to say about your behavioral patterns is we've talked about cross time, and behavioral patterns across time are really, really important data for us, because that tells us not just what happened this week when we were overwhelmed with all of the things that were happening, but it tells us generally across time, how do we actually intervene, or how do we navigate different circumstances in different contextual dynamics. And that becomes really important to us as we're trying to grow in different contexts, in different containers. And so if as a leader, we're trying to grow into our next evolution of our leadership, we have to know what our behavioral patterns are in those various contexts, and to be able to practice them over and over and over again across time, so that we can then eventually get to that next level of our leadership. Okay, I think maybe a couple more topics here. And so some common areas where people tend to drift is when they have to make decisions quickly. They might do things like not include other people in that conversation. They might bypass collaboration because they think it's too time consuming, too energy consuming, or whatever it is. If they have to get critical feedback from someone, they might shift into, well, two things. They might only get feedback from people that they think are going to give them the feedback that they want. And then they might also shift into trying to justify their actions instead of listening so that they can learn from those behaviors. And maybe if you're tired, you might over rely on hierarchy or authority to get what you want, instead of investing the time and the energy in the circumstances that are at play. And so, specifically, inviting dissent on decisions that you have to make, on getting critical feedback about change initiatives that are not going the way that they were supposed to go. Like, really taking the time to sit in that, instead of relying on hierarchy or your positional authority to say it is what it is, do it, accept it, And so what I want you to do is, I want you to think about, what are your areas where you tend to drift or to not be aligned? What are the specific contextual factors, and what are the specific behavioral patterns that happen for you? And many of you will probably already know what your behavioral patterns are, or what the context are that cause you the most stress, and that cause you to be the most incongruent in your leadership. And the work here that we want you to do is, yes, we want you to be able to name it, but we want you to also to be able to do it with enough specificity that you can actually then take conscious action on it in the future. So in the future, when you're in that context, you can tell yourself before you go into that moment, when I'm in this context, I tend to revert to this specific behavioral pattern, and my goal for this context is to not revert to that behavioral pattern, and to change actively change the dynamic in that moment so that I can lead better, right? And so the goal here is about facilitating conscious change for you to be the best leader, or the best version of yourself that you can be. And let's talk about feedback. So this is the last area. So there's the body, the behavioral patterns, and now we're going to talk about feedback. So how can you, as a leader, make it safe for people to give you feedback? And so this is where most people have the biggest gap, not because people are not willing to share with them, but because the way that you ask is just as important as actually asking and receiving. And so we want you to be able to ask in a way that is appropriate, and we want you to be able to receive in a way that is appropriate. Because if you don't ask in an appropriate way, and you then also can't receive in an appropriate way, then you don't have the insight and the actual data that you need to be able to facilitate conscious choice. And so I want to say that there is a significant difference between having sort of a vague approval seeking, I want to get approval about who I am and how I am, and a values centered or value anchored approach that actually helps people to give you the feedback that you need. And so it's less about, I want to make sure that I am being a good person, and more about, I want to know specifically, does this behavior match with this value that I have? And if it doesn't, what is a specific behavior that I can change or adjust to be more in alignment? And so we're going to talk a little bit about what this looks like. And so when you have vague requests for feedback from people, you're going to get vague responses. And so if you say, how am I doing as a leader? Or is everything okay with my leadership? Then these are going to produce comfort for the people that you're working with, not necessarily clarity. And the gaps that you're trying to fill are not going to become available to you. And so what you have to do is you have to give them specific values anchored prompts to help you. And you can do this by saying, one of my values is inclusion. Have you seen places where I have drifted from that? And if you have, what can I do to fix it? Or how can I better manage it? Or how can I better navigate it? And by asking, where did my intention not match my impact? And saying, my intention in this circumstance was to include as many people as possible. If that was not the impact that happened, how do I go back and fix the circumstance so that I can include as many people as possible, and that the people who I'm inviting feel included in that? And so where does my impact not match my intention? And I want to be really clear here that this is when you use value-centered or values-anchored prompts, this is what invites people to actually give you feedback on what they're observing, instead of, you're really great, I feel safe and comfortable around you, I can't tell you why, but it's just, you're great, right? But maybe there's a little bit of discomfort that they don't know how to articulate. They don't have the opportunity to articulate it. And so if you can give them clear and specific values anchored prompts, then you're giving them specific information to work with that they can then sit with and say, did I feel as though I was included in that decision or in that dynamic or in that circumstance? And then if they didn't, they can say, I didn't feel included in this because I felt like you were rushing to make a decision because I know that it was due in 24 hours. But I have also told you, a couple of times in the last couple of months that this is how I feel about this circumstance. And I felt like you could have taken that into consideration and you didn't, right? And so giving them that specific information to work with, they then can look at themselves, how they're experiencing your dynamic, how they're experiencing your behaviors, and how they are experiencing the impact of your values in real time. And the other thing that I want to talk about is kind of targeting your blind spots. And so giving them specific information to work with. So saying, in this setting, whatever that is, that meeting, this dynamic, where do you notice my behavior is shifting in ways that I might not be aware of? And so literally defining the context or the container for them and asking them, where is their misalignment that I can't see, right? And if you do that, then you are opening up this potential to get information and feedback on things that you didn't even know that you needed. And of course, if you've been doing a lot of personal growth work, you already know how beneficial it is to ask this question and to get that feedback. And if you haven't done that, then I would say at least once a month, try to ask people in your life this question so that you can get some specific feedback on your blind spots. Because every single person on the planet has blind spots. It doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter how educated you are, and it doesn't matter how much you are focusing on your personal growth. Every person on the planet has blind spots. And the more that you can recognize and acknowledge that you are lacking in a certain area, the better able you're going to be to consciously choose paths forward that are going to support the entire collective. Okay. With this, I want to say, when we're talking about feedback, the quality of your questions and the way that you ask for feedback is going to determine the quality that you get back. And so, one, it's about the quality of the questions and the way that you approach the questions. And then the other side of that is, how do you actually receive that? How do you get that information? And what do you do with that information? And so can you actively listen to receive feedback with curiosity, letting go of defensiveness, stop trying to improve your intention and recognize the actual impact that you're having? When you can do that, you're going to be able to build a lot more trust and a lot more transparency, maybe is not the right word, but you're going to be able to build a lot more trust and a lot more safety if you can ask for feedback in a way that is relevant and then receive feedback in ways that make people feel safe and confident in giving you that feedback. And so again, the quality is going to determine what you get, and the way that you receive that information is also going to determine whether or not you get it again in the future. So we want you to be really, really cognizant of how you're actually receiving the feedback that you're getting from people. And the final thing is, what do you do with that feedback once you get it, right? And we'll talk about that in a moment. And so, again, we skipped over the pause and reflect aspect of this, but the pause and reflect is what's going to give you the internal conditions to be able to look at that feedback, to sit with how it lands, and to be able to recognize in real time how you can become less reactive and consciously choose as you're moving forward. But again, we're gonna move into pause in the fourth book. It's literally the entire fourth book talks about pause practice for the ability to be present and to practice presence in your leadership. And so with that, let's talk about what do you do with this information once you have it. And we're going to move through a really, really short sequence that is going to focus on bringing conscious action to the insights that you've been working on here. And what I want you to do is I want you to try to use this to the best of your ability in real time. And I want to remind you here that you do not need to have anything perfectly figured out. And so the purpose of this practice is to practice, to practice noticing, to practice what's coming up, to practice how you respond, and to practice consciously choosing a different path forward. And so what I want to remind you of for like a full sequence here is name the value that you have. What is the value that you're working towards? What are you trying to embody in this situation? I want you to name it. Second thing I want you to do is I want you to actually trace that value back through your behaviors. What did you actually do that demonstrated that value? Again, not what you intended to do, but what was observable and what was the impact that it had. And again, if someone was watching, what did they see? The third thing, check in with your body. When you bring this situation to your mind right now, what does your body actually do? Where do you feel it? And what specifically is that physiological response trying to tell you? Then, where is that misalignment or that drift zone, right? And so what specifically are the conditions that produced that misalignment? The contextual factors. Was it the person? Was it the speed of the circumstance? Was it your ego? Was it a interpersonal relational dynamic? Was it an emotional concern, a structural complaint or constraint? And so like if you're working in a larger system, was there something in that constrained your ability to act in the way that you wanted? I want you to name the contextual factors, not just the behaviors, but name the contextual factors that contributed to that alignment or misalignment. And then I want you to identify the feedback that you've gotten about that gap. And so has someone actually given you feedback about that pattern before, whether it was directly or indirectly? And if they have, what did you do with that feedback? And if you were to ask a values-centered question about this specific situation today, what would it be? Who would you ask? And I want you all to just kind of sit with this for a moment. These are all the things we've been talking about so far. What's the value? What are the observable behaviors? What came up in your body and what is it trying to tell you? Where is the misalignment in the specific context or circumstances? And then what is the feedback that you've gotten from people? And again, this is not me trying to solve any of your problems here. What I want you to do with this is I want you to just notice. I want you to be able to reflect with yourself about where you have misalignment, what kind of feedback you've already gotten about that misalignment. And I want you to have that so that you know how to consciously move forward to create a better path forward for everyone. And so the last thing that I want to do is I want to talk about once you've identified that pattern, that misalignment, and you know the contextual factors, the behavioral patterns, and the conditions that produce that misalignment, we want you to think about How do you close the loop? How do you intentionally realign so that you can be congruent in your actions and your behaviors? And what I want you to do here is I want you to choose one small, specific behavioral shift that you can implement to help you with this commitment to your value. And so this can be anything you want it to be, but small and intentional behavior that you can use to shift. And so you might want to try to pause for 3 seconds before responding to feedback so that you feel calm and clear-headed and you're not reactionary to an egotistical response, an emotional response, or something along those lines. You can say, I want to pause for 3 seconds before I do anything. You can also say, I want to ask people a values anchored prompt so that I have feedback about this, and I'm going to do it on Friday, every Friday, right? You could also say, I want to track my congruence over 3 weeks time with 3 specific values, and I want to annotate it on the scorecard over the next however many weeks. And so whatever your small and intentional action is, I want you to take an intentional action so that you are consciously choosing to try and shift that misalignment behavior for yourself. And one thing I want you to remember here is that a vague commitment is going to give you a vague result. And so if you can be specific and you can say, this is exactly what I'm going to do, this is when I'm going to do it, and this is why I'm going to do it, that is going to help you to get the response that you want and to actually create the changes that you're trying to create. And so especially if you're trying to build trust in your team or with your team, you can say, this is the behavior I'm working on, and this is what I'm going to do throughout my days or my weeks or my months. This is how I'm going to check in and follow up. Literally say that, and that is how you build and rebuild trust in those circumstances. And so with that, I want to leave you with something we covered in the 14th issue of our newsletter, and that is that congruent leadership does not actually require perfection. Perfection doesn't exist, but it does require presence and the willingness to actually notice when you're out of alignment so that you can take meaningful steps to restore it. And so being incongruent in our leadership does not inherently mean that we are wrong. And if we want to be conscious leaders, then we just have to recognize when we are incongruent so that we can consciously adjust our behaviors to be more congruent. And with that, I will say that being able to trace your values and being able to recognize your misalignment are not advanced practices, but they're just a way for us to consciously and honestly check in with ourselves, to pay attention, to be consistent, and to notice what kinds of things help us build trust or lose trust in our teams and in our interpersonal dynamics. And so since we are behind, I missed last month's live session because I was traveling for the book tour. So since we are behind, we're going to do another session on Thursday this week. And in that session, we're going to talk about repair as a leadership practice. And so how do we course correct our actions and behaviors in the moment so that we can be more congruent in our leadership. And so we're going to pick up on that on Thursday from here because being able to actually notice what we're doing wrong and how we're doing it wrong, why we're doing it wrong is important, but it's only part of the work. We have to then be able to consciously bring that into our next circumstance so that we don't continuously lose trust. So again, time and context. If we are continuously misaligned, then all we've done is establish that we are not trustworthy. But if we're misaligned, we fix it, we demonstrate that we can be trustworthy. If we're misaligned and we fix it again, we're demonstrating again that we have the ability and the capacity to actually repair the damage that we're doing because we want to be conscious and we want to be better leaders. Right? And so with that, I will say, let's go ahead and close out. And as we close out, I want to leave you with just one final thought, and that is, where are you actually at in your leadership right now, specifically with your behavior? And where does your behavior tell a different story than your values? And so where essentially are you misaligned? And what is the most specific thing that you can do within the next, let's say, 48 hours to close that gap? So a tiny micro moment that you can actively work towards within the next 48 hours to minimize that gap. And with that, I want you to write it down. Again, vague reflection is going to give you vague results. So give me a specific example of where your leadership is not aligned and what specifically you can do in your micro moments to create change. Thank you all so much for being here. I appreciate you more than you know. If you are not already following the Conscious Leader newsletter on LinkedIn, make sure that you give that a follow. And with that, I will see you all on Thursday. We will continue our Book 3 Consciously Congruent session, and we will also, I think, do a practice from the Leadership Congruence workbook, which is the workbook for Book 3. And yes, I hope to see you all then. Thank you all so much. Appreciate you.